Hello, welcome in on this episode of Locked On Canadiens, another mailbag.
You're Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone. It's weird doing this and not being on the other side of it. Welcome into episode 1122 of Locked On Canadiens. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. We are available and free everywhere you get your podcasts and also here on YouTube if you're watching the video version of this. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel to make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sportsing like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I am your newest host, Ian Boisvert. You can find me on the internet at Maybe It's Ian, and I'm joined by the incomparable active stick, Laura Saba. Laura, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited. This is your first show, and I was supposed to do a mailbag on Friday, and then we were doing a bonus episode on Friday, and I was like, why don't we just do a Monday mailbag instead and just shake things up?
Yeah, Monday mailbag. It's the alliteration. Who would say no to that?
It's the summer. We can do whatever we want.
Awesome. Well, we got some really great questions from a lot of the active listeners here, and the first one from I know big friend of the show, Tony Ferrari. So you want to jump into that one?
Absolutely. Tony is one of our absolute favorite people. And if you missed our episodes with him that late last month, you definitely should check them out. We talked a lot of Canadians and we got so hyped for Demidov. It was a fantastic time. And Tony's question has to do with defensemen. The question is, also, follow him at the Tony Ferrari and catch his work on the Hockey News. He did a deep dive into the Canadiens prospect pool. Fantastic. Good friend of the show. We're a good friend to him because we love him so much. Here's his question. With Matheson and Savard more than likely in the lineup on day one and 82 games for Gooley if he stays healthy, how many games do you hope to see from Lane Hudson, David Reinbacher, Arbour Jacky, Jaden Struble, Jordan Harris, and Logan Mailloux in the NHL? So, Ian, I figured we could do this. We could take each person, maybe.
Yeah.
Unless you wanted to talk about, what the lineup, what you think the lineup will look like on day one.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to start by just kind of, Tony listed a lot of names there, right? Like, there's a lot of guys who we want to see play in the NHL this year. I think it was a helpful exercise for me to go through the list of Canadiens defensemen who come training camp we're going to be expecting to be in the mix for an NHL spot, right? So the list is kind of long. Matheson and Savard, like Tony said, we're expecting them to be playing game one. Jordan Harris, who is surprisingly the third highest paid defenseman on the Montreal Canadiens, which is really funny to think about. Obviously, when Gooley's extension kicks in and when, Jacky's kicks in, they're going to jump him. But for now, he is, the top paid second pairing defenseman on the Montreal Canadiens, which is bizarre. Then you have Jacky, Barron, Struble, Gooley, Hudson, Mailloux, Reinbacher. And then I got to Engstrom, and Engstrom's where I stopped. I thought Engstrom's probably an AHLer this year, even though the hype on him seems pretty high.
Yeah.
So
we got to get Patrick Bexell on to talk about Engstrom. I think
I would love that.
The most insight. Yeah.
So that's 10 guys fighting for 6 starting spots and then like one rotation spot. We know that Marty loves the rotation on defense. So that's a lot, right? Like there's a lot there. It's going to be hard for the guys like, like Hudson and Reinbacher to play a regular role. That said, Tony's question was specifically how many games I hope to see out of these people. And I hope to see 82 games of Lane Hudson. Right?
Me too. Sign me up for that.
Right. That's my heart saying that. My brain says he's probably a rotation guy, right? Like he's not playing every night, or he's playing in the AHL and absolutely just torturing some of the teams down in the A.
Hopefully Belleville.
Hopefully Belleville. If he has to play in the AHL, just strictly play him against Toronto and Belleville. I think we'd be fine with that. So I mean, what do you think is realistic for Lane Hudson? Because I think we're all kind of drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit on him. Like, we really want him to be an NHLer immediately. How realistic is that?
I think there's growing pains, right? Like we always like as good as he is and as good as I know he's going to be, like, you know, like I don't scouting is kind of an inexact sport, and we always talk about, you know, like this kind of stuff, it doesn't always pan out the way you would predict. But for me, like Lane Hudson is so good that there's not a chance that he's not going to be not serviceable, a major contributor to this team in the NHL. But the thing that we always do, I think, especially as Habs fans, is we forget that growing pains, like the transition to the NHL. So for me, realistically, Hudson, opening night, he's going to be there. He's going to earn that spot. His personality just screams it. He's going to earn that spot opening night. But I would say, honestly, I see him playing like fits and spurts, right? Like he'll be up for a few weeks, sent down for a few weeks, up for a few weeks. And for me, I think a realistic number is going to be between the 20 and 30 range for this year. Unless we get to the trade deadline, someone gets traded, there is room for him. I sense he's going to be the first call-up guy. You know, like Joshua Waugh kind of was always the first call-up guy, and then he stick around when there was a roster spot for him. That's what I sense from Hudson, much more than I do with like some of the other AHLers transitioning to the NHL.
Yeah, I completely agree. As much as I'd like to see him, and I'm still leaving myself the possibility that we get to training camp and he plays a brand of hockey that makes him, irreplaceable on this roster. Which, is that going to be hard for him to do? Yeah. Is it impossible? I don't think so. He does things that no one else in this organization can do. So like he has an advantage in that, like, no one can do Lane Hudson things except for Lane Hudson. And if he's able to do them out of the gate, it's going to be impossible to not play him.
I mean, Caden Gooley made the roster like first night, right? And then never looked back. It's not out of the realm of possibility. It's just that right now there's more of a logjam than when Caden Gooley first made this team.
Or another guy that Tony asked about in Jaden Struble. Like last year, he made the jump to the NHL after an okay college career, and then he came to the AHL and he was okay there, and then he stepped into the NHL and it was like, holy cow, where's this kid been? Like, he looked like a guy who was never going to play another game for the Laval Rocket. Like, and that's not to say he was like jumping off the score sheet or anything, but he just looked like he was always in control, which you want in your defenseman, right? Like, you don't want the guys who treat the puck like it's a hand grenade. Like, if Struble had the puck, I wasn't worried. Like, he was playing such a calm brand of hockey that, like, that's another guy where I think he's a rotation guy, but like, maybe he shouldn't be. Maybe he should just be one of the 6 best defenders on this team.
Yeah.
The problem of that being is we have 10 6 best defenders on this team. So it's just difficult. It's a numbers game, unfortunately.
And for me, like, this brings me to the heartbreaking part, which is the Jordan Harris, because I think Jordan Harris would be an 82er, except that I think he's absolutely going to get traded this year. I think there's no chance. Like, it's either Struble or Harris. And I feel like they kind of like Struble's physical gifts a little bit more, but and Jordan Harris is the kind of player that a team gearing up for a championship would want, right? Like, he's very stable back there. He's not going to be your top pairing defenseman. He's just going to make smart decisions. They had 2 of them. They got rid of 1. Now they have 2 of them all of a sudden again. So I think that Jordan Harris is not going to play 82 games with the Montreal Canadiens because they're going to trade him. But if he sticks around every game he's healthy, he's playing.
Yeah, no, same. And the last one on this list I wanted to touch on was David Reinbacher. It's my hope that he plays exactly 0 games in the NHL this year. And I mean that earnestly. Like, I want him to just go to the AHL and learn how to play in North America. We saw glimpses of it last season. You know, he came into the AHL, he scored pretty quick. Like, he looked like he could do it. I want to keep seeing it, right? Like, I want him to have that moment. And it's weird because I feel like if the Canadiens didn't draft Demidov, that there would be some kind of rush to get him in this year because Matvei Michkov is going to start playing. And regardless of whether or not that's fair, that comparison is always going to exist. It's just now it's a little bit easier to deal with, right? Because like, okay, we righted that cosmic wrong by selecting Demidov this year. So it's a lot less pressure on Reinbacher. And now instead of it being Reinbacher versus Michkov, it's Demidov versus Michkov. Like, they're going to be compared to one another. So I don't know what your thoughts on Reinbacher playing this year are, but mine are pretty low. I don't want him in the NHL that much.
I mostly agree with you, except that this is the NHL and it does have the cup of coffee mentality. So
Yeah.
he is going to play games in the NHL. Absolutely. He's going to play a few games. I don't know if it'll be 3 games. I don't know if it'll be 20 games. I think it'll be closer to the 3 end, honestly, but there's absolutely going to be a point where they're going to call him up because he's David Reinbacher, because he's going to do things in the AHL. They're going to force their hand. And because it's just that's what they do with these types of guys, right? Like picking that high and giving that guy that opportunity. Like his cup of coffee is coming this year. I 100% believe that. Does that leaves us, I think, with Jacky and Mailloux.
Yeah.
Real quick, Jacky, I think, is always going to be in the NHL, but he's going to be a rotation guy, absolutely. And with Mailloux, I think that they're going to mostly keep him in the AHL. I don't think he's going to make a full transition to the NHL, but there's definitely going to be injury call-ups, et cetera, et cetera. Like I think Logan Mailloux, I think for me, it's going to be at least 15 games this year in the NHL.
Yeah, same. He's probably one of those call-ups. This team can never stay healthy and will never stay healthy. He in the AHL, obviously, like offensively, he showed a lot, but we always knew that was there. We need, from what I had seen from him, I need to see more defensive play before I feel comfortable with him in an NHL role permanently. Cool. Well, that's our first question. We will be jumping into some more soon, but first, a word from our sponsor. We are driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agreed Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. One of the things I love about Indeed is it makes hiring all in one place so easy. It was just so much easier to match with Indeed. And I've been in situations where we haven't used it and it's been really difficult to find that match. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about it. You heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right. We are back. Laura, we have another question here.
We've got a couple. So our good friend Jeffers has a tongue-in-cheek question for us. Why did you fire Scott? Was it incompetence or was it gross incompetence? Well, Scott dropped a swear on our live show the other night that I later had to edit out. So I went to the network and I said, I can't work with this man anymore. It's him or me. And I got chosen. No, Scott left because he's going to be spending more time with his fiance and planning a wedding, et cetera, et cetera. So I get a cool new co-host for that. Good friend of the show, Massimo. Do you think Hughes had all 3 of those contracts, like Jacky, Barron, and Gooley, on the back burner and was just perhaps waiting to see if it was worth moving one before he finalized them?
I feel like, so I'll start with Jacky because I feel like he's an interesting player because the market value on him is so different from what his value on the ice is. And that's not to say he's a bad hockey player, but like the idea that teams are trying to throw a first round pick at the Canadiens to get Arbour Jacky, an undrafted, free agent defenseman the Canadiens just invited to training camp and he, ended up working out. I feel like if those rumors are true and the Canadiens haven't accepted those deals, I don't think they're going to move Jacky and that there was never really an option to trade him. I think it was just a conversation of, do we want to try to lock him up long-term now, or do we want to bridge him so we get more information on him? as much as I love Jacky, he hasn't been healthy. Both seasons that he's played, he's been banged up. And he admitted to playing hurt just because he wanted to keep playing, and it probably caused him, more damage to, I think it was his shoulder again, but it was the other shoulder. So I think, if there was a move to be made with Arbour Jacky, it would need to absolutely blow the Canadiens out of the water, and I just don't think that that's going to happen. I don't know if that's what you think as well, Laura.
I think one person pointed out the reason why Jacky's contract was so economical is because he's an RFA and he doesn't have leverage. I think as a package deal, guys like him are always teams that an NHL GM would want on the team, but then when it comes time to actually give up assets for them, I don't think that they're ready to do that, right? Like there's so many players like that where it's like, oh, I would love him on my team. It's like, great, give me some value for him. Actually, absolutely not, right?
Right.
I think that, we're talking about like FOMO and the market value, et cetera, et cetera. I think part of market value a lot of times is not just necessarily I want a player like that on my team, but it's also like how much value this particular person has to their own team. It's not necessarily going to replicate itself on your own team when you're trading, right? Like what Arbour Jacky means to the Montreal Canadiens, he's not going to mean that to a lot of other teams in the league because they won't play him the same kind of minutes, or,
Right.
they don't have the right kind of situation for him, because this is a player with skill, right? We talked about undrafted, etc. He's a player that does have some skill. He does sometimes have issues with, decision making as to whether to exhibit the skill and whether to exhibit the toughness. And I think like there's got to be a bit more balance there. But his value to the Montreal Canadiens is actually it's very much based on what the Canadiens can provide him in terms of ice time and who they put him on the ice with. So when an NHL GM is coveting a guy that is really hard to play against and really makes everyone else mad, like opponents mad, like there are so many guys like that. It's like, which one are you actually going to give up assets for, whether it's a pick, whether it's a prospect, whether it's a 1-for-1 player? You never know, right? So I personally, I just think that with Jacky, he was always going to stay a Montreal Canadian this time around.
Yeah, I agree. And moving on to, the Justin Barron element of this conversation, like what could Justin Barron be worth at this point? And I feel bad saying that, especially considering, the Canadiens moved a highly popular player in order to get him.
Stanley Cup winning player.
Yeah, good stick, Lecky. Like I really worry about this player's, and I think I mentioned it on the last episode too, that, I wonder what his role is, because I just don't see him carving a spot for himself in a highly competitive defensive environment in Montreal. Like the Canadiens don't have a lot of really great pieces, but a lot of them are, very concentrated onto the blue line. They've focused highly on getting top end defensemen into this organization. And Justin Barron was supposed to be a piece of that, right? Like they coveted him in that trade with Colorado.
And he didn't live up to it.
No, and he hasn't yet. Can he still? Like that's where I'm kind of, I don't know. Like I genuinely don't know if he's going to be able to this year just turn it on and be the guy that they thought they were getting. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I think he's running out of time. I think this year is the year, right? Like this is like I think he has to show something this year. And it just like whenever you think of like, who has a place in this organization, I haven't felt that Justin Barron has like claimed a place for himself in the future of this organization. And like sometimes you see bursts of him being really, really great. And you think, all right, if we could get that all the time, that would be amazing. But I do think that he is kind of one of the odd ones out in the Canadiens, on the Canadiens blue line. And then we have Gouli. And I believe, if I'm remembering his media availability, like the conversations were ongoing. They wanted 8 years. The Canadiens didn't want 8 years. So there was like a little bit back and forth there, but that was kind of the main thing that Kent Hughes was kind of working on up until the time that it was announced.
Yeah, why do you think the Canadiens didn't want to go 8 years? Like that's what I kind of found to be confusing.
I think it was his injuries.
Yeah, I wonder if the cap hit would have been too high. Like if he was like, okay, if I'm giving you 2 more UFA years, my number is 7.5, not 5.5. You know what I mean? Like I wonder if that was part of the calculus here, because they love this player, right? Like they love this guy.
I think there's an element of it as well, like that you were saying, like the cap hit was going to be much higher, but also like this guy is a player that could be, an $8 million defenseman, or he could be a $5 million defenseman, and the Canadians want to give it more time and see like which one of those he is. Because I think like obviously he's had a little bit of inconsistency, and there were some injury problems, particularly last year. Like I was very disappointed that he wasn't able to, you know, um, show the promise that he had, but I feel like there's still some hope that in there is this defenseman that could be an $8 million defenseman. So it kind of works out better for both of them at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah, and I again like the part that I like about this, if I'm Caden Gooley, is at the end of this, I'm still kind of in my prime, and I get to cash in again on a larger salary cap. Like we're seeing that model taken into account with the league's top young players. Like Austin Matthews hasn't signed an 8-year deal yet. He signed a couple of 5s, and every time he gets to cash in. So it's a wise move if you're confident enough as a player to be like, yeah, in 5 years I'm going to be better than I am now. Why would I sell myself at today's value when I can get a much higher value in 5 years, and then maybe get to build an 8-year deal out of that? He won't be too old at that point, right? Like, so yeah, I don't think the Canadians ever thought about trading Caden Gooley. I don't think that ever crossed their mind. He's just too valuable of a player. He fits what this team is trying to do. They play him in all of the toughest minutes they can imagine. Like they're not moving on from that player until, unless they think they've got a better option. And right now I don't think they have one.
Agreed.
Cool.
Agreed.
Cool. All right. Well, we are headed into our last question about our first Habs memories. But first, our sponsor today is FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. It's part of the reason I'm doing this show. But as playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So I head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, Laura, we have one more question before we hit the road here.
Yes. Well, we got Bill Van V, who actually has 2 questions, but one of them is about
cool.
PTOs. And I think I want to postpone that a little bit. And let me tell you why, because we're going to get closer to training camp. And there's going to be more and more unsigned FAs or people trying to get back here from Europe, for example. So maybe we do a prediction as to who's going to get a PTO with the Habs a little bit closer to training camp, because that's when, people start signing. But Bill sends us another email. Welcome, Ian, to the podcast. I look forward to your thoughts and input on all things Habs. Always remember to have fun. To get to know you better, what was your earliest, holy cow, I love the Habs moment? For me, I remember being 12 and watching Claude Lemieux score in overtime in the playoffs against Hartford in Game 7. What a rush. What play made you a Habs fan forever?
I think it was that 5-0 comeback against the Rangers. I must have been in middle school when that happened. I can't
crumble in a corner and die.
I know. I'm gonna try my best to not do that, but I am what I am. I can't hide that. And it's important to mention that because I was out doing something that night. I came home and it was already 3-0, and I was like, do I even watch it? So I started watching with my dad. And then I remember, I think Ryder had a couple. And then we thought he scored the third, but I think Mark Streit tipped it. Like something happened. And then the Kovalev goal where he just he hit a one-timer and just fell over and he's on his back like a turtle celebrating.
And then Koivu jumps on him.
Yeah. And then Koivu with the shootout winner. Like it was one of the most incredible games I've ever seen. That was pretty early in my fandom. I'm sure there were moments around that, but that's the first one that pops into my head. I remember when it got to 5-0, the fans had been handed out like these banners that you would pull and they would say, go Habs go. And they had thrown them on the ice. It was like, oh man, this is going to be bad. I remember the next day I went back to school, and a friend of mine who was a big Rangers fan.
School,
I
I
was
went
wearing
back
my
to work. You went back to
yeah.
school. I went back to work.
I went back to school and I wore my Canadian shirt. He's like, "Why are you wearing that? The Canadians lost last night." He went to bed when it was 5-0. And I was
Was he
like,
a Rangers fan?
"Yeah." And I was
Oh
like, "The Canadians won in a shootout." He's like, "No, they didn't." And we didn't have cell phones, so like he had to go home that night and figure out like, "Oh man, they did lose. Like how did that happen?" Yeah, it's one of my first, because I live in Connecticut, so I'm surrounded by Rangers, Bruins, Islanders fans, almost always. So that was a pretty fun moment for me. I don't know, Laura, what was your first like, wow, this team really is something moment?
I'm gonna tell you how I became a Habs fan. But first I'm gonna say that game, that 5-0 comeback, ruined watching hockey for me because now I still do it. Every time the Canadians drop goals to people and it's like a blowout, I still watch hoping for that comeback, and I still have not seen one.
Yeah.
So I think they had one this year, right? Like there was this one game where they had an insane comeback. I think it might have been 4-1 or 5-1.
Yeah, probably. They're
It was
they're
a
due
Marty
for one
game, I
every
know
once
that.
in a while. Yeah.
Yeah, but it just like every time the Canadians will go down like 4-0, 5-0, I'll still hope that a comeback is
Yeah.
coming, and it has not. And that was, I want to say, like how early? Like that was 2000 to 2010, 2008, 2000, I don't know,
Wow.
2006. I can remember. Anyway, so I became a Habs fan in 2001.
Right.
I became a Habs fan because the first game I ever watched was the game that Saku came back. After I had
Wow.
no context for this, right? Like I was just watching the local sports team as you do. And I didn't know the story, but obviously who can't be moved by that? But not only that, like that was another comeback win against the Ottawa Senators. And they made the playoffs that night, right? So like it was everything just aligned to make it seem magical. I had no idea that the Canadians were like in the midst of this era of like mediocrity. I just fell in love at that point, because that was the first game that I ever saw, like first Montreal Canadiens game I ever saw. Like I did not grow up here. I was aware of the 1993 win, because we used to, like, I have family here, so we used to spend summers here. So I had like that in my consciousness. But the first game I actually ever saw was a Saku game, and that's how I became a Habs fan.
Yeah. Wow. What was your first game that you saw? Was that the first game you went to in person? Yeah, that's so my first game in person, I full disclosure, I've never been to the Bell Center. I've
Oh my
never
god,
seen
we
a
got to
game
change
there.
that.
I know. I'm hoping that changes in the near future. My first game was at the Nassau Memorial Coliseum where the Islanders used to play, which is one of my favorite buildings I've ever been in. Like it is a barn with a capital B. Like it is just what you imagine when you think of old time hockey.
Old
And I
time
saw a
hockey.
game there. I saw a game there 2000, must have been 2008. Montreal in New York. The Canadiens went down 4-1. It was the young Carey Price era where Halak had left, and it was, or not Halak, Hughes had left, and it was him and Halak. The Canadiens went down 4-1. I had tickets right next to the Islanders penalty box, and Georges Laraque fought Mitch Fritz, and Fritz is bleeding out of his face, and I'm sitting right next. If you go back and watch the video, there's a kid wearing a really old Guy Lafleur jersey. That was me.
That's you.
And I remember that was the turning point because it happened like midway through the third period. Plekanec had two, Kovalev had two, Higgins had one, and they ended up winning 5-4. My first game ever was a 4-1 comeback against the Islanders. So like that was, I mean, as far as like moments that got me hooked on doing this, on watching it, on wanting to talk about it, like that one was instrumental. Like I don't know that I'm doing a lot of the stuff that I do now if the Canadians just pack it in and lose that game, right?
Yeah.
Like I got to see them do something like really incredible against, the Islanders back then weren't very good, but neither were the Canadians, so that's fine.
Yeah, and it's like it's definitely a timing thing. Like that game that I got to go to, like that was sheer luck. And then I got to go to the Canadian Centennial game, like through sheer luck. Like my friend got better tickets and then just gave me his. And I feel like the fact that I've been so lucky to be part of those moments is like I'm convinced that like fate is going to make it happen so that when the Canadians finally win the Stanley Cup, I'm going to be in the arena. I'm going to be so disappointed if this doesn't happen. Like I've set myself up for this. But yeah, like I think, everyone has those moments. And so like, listeners, send us yours so that we can read them on the show. And don't forget that we have mailbags on Fridays, so send us your mailbag questions. You can send them to us at lockedoncanadians@gmail.com. You can put them in the Twitter. You can either DM them or reply. You can put them in the YouTube comments. And Ian, take it away for the outro.
Awesome. Well, thanks for making Locked On Canadiens your first listen of the day. For your second listen, I recommend Locked On NHL podcast. They provide you a national perspective on all things NHL and every day with national experts, including someone you might recognize at some point this week. So check them out as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks again for listening. We will see you next time.